Session 3 with Ben and Bob and Ben. And Ben, there's a lot of things going on everywhere in so many different environments that my perspective on my revolution is always being adjusted. And we do have an ongoing collaboration here. Maybe we're Trotsky-Lenin, maybe we're McLuhan and Ted Carpenter, maybe we're Zappa and Beefheart, maybe we're Obama and Dick Cheney, or Joe Biden and Ron Paul. Anyways, we're Duality here, and I'm wondering what could we say to our listeners, because a friend of mine, you met him, Dave Neufeld, I think it was him, he said, it sounds rather scholarly, Bob, and I don't want that to be what we're doing, though we can include that, but we're not being scholars here, are we?
I don't think so. I think you work best in a very lively, interactive, direct way, and you don't prove what you say by referring to texts, although McLuhan comes in quite a bit, but in general you feel that if something is worth saying, it's something which will be a soundbite which will work internationally over all electronic media. And that's why we both love Frank Zappa, because he found ways of saying things which were punchy and true and cut through a lot of the usual ways in which people have respect for things. And we both like that, and we both want to talk like that, and I agree with you. We don't want to be too scholarly.
Yeah, we are, pretending at least that we're broadcasting from the bunker. We're trying to organize social energies to take advantage of the great breakdown that's happening now. But we know that it's tough for the particulars. We have general principles, the revolution must go on, and power to the people, and every other thing, plus the medium is the message, all these slogans, but the particulars. And so I immediately love and think about the Zappa anecdote, which you love, about the pinheads. And, when he said, hey, snazzy executive, which I think, according to the archives, that's a previous circular. It's not where he goes into the snazzy executive. You know what I mean? Into the pinhead story. Are you following?
Well, I am following. I'm surprised you call it a story. So, because the way this particular set of ideas, the way you're talking about it, I always took to be like the secret center, the secret message, the special gloss, the ultra perceptive nugget, that if you could get hold of that, then you could start to understand not only Frank Zappa, but the whole system he worked in. So I never thought this pinhead thing was just another story, because when you say a story, it sounds like, well, it's just another thing you can say. It's just another little bit of entertainment. And I always found it more crucial than that. I think the idea of, actually, what I'm dealing with as an artist, and I think we probably aspire to the same thing, is recognizing all sorts of particulars and understanding how each particular has an eyeball fixed upon the cosmic universe, that there is no particular that is not part of the universe, going between the one and the many, going between the universe and the particular. And this shunt between the two is restricted in most areas of society. It seems to me nobody's doing it, and we're trying to do it. And that's why I think what we're trying to do in these discussions is revolutionary.
Yes, I misspoke when I said story. I agree exactly that it's the nugget, it's the core of Zappa trying to explain what he was doing up to that point. But I immediately think of nobody's doing it. The actual description of the little pinhead is an eyeball in the universe. That is what the internet is giving people. They got their own broadcasting nexus, Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, and they can create, and everybody can be in touch with everybody else. It's an interesting extension of what Zappa was thinking about. You see, McLuhan pointed out, not McLuhan, Don Thiel, McLuhan's greatest student next to me, Don Thiel, went on to become president of Trent University in Ontario, Canada. He said that Fitting His Wake anticipated digital culture. And he agrees, and he read your book, Ben. He died earlier, in April 2008. But he read your book, and I have essays of his new book. Actually chapters from his new book that his widow gave me. It isn't published yet, but there's sections and annotations, references to Ben Watson's Negative Dialectics of Poodle Play, because Don Thiel did his PhD on James Joyce and Wyndham Lewis and Pound. No, not Wyndham Lewis. James Joyce, Pound, Eliot, and Yeats in 1953 under McLuhan. It's McLuhan's first PhD student. It's a fantastic thesis, but he was always up to date. And when I turned him on to Zappa, which he had heard a bit about in the 60s, and you read your book, you were in the book. You're in heavy, one of the top Joycean critics in the world. So good that the other Joyceans don't like him. But
Bob, I'm so glad that finally I've entered the world of scholarship in this way.
You have?
Yeah, that I'm in the footnotes. See, I mean, this is so satisfying.
We're quadrophenic. We just when we're denying our scholarship motives, all of a sudden I quote a scholar. Okay, so the point is that Thiel's not like that. So he's anticipating. He sees that Finnegan's Wake anticipated not just television, as McLuhan saw, but digital culture. And he also saw the importance of Zappa's work within that. And so can we say, or I'm saying now maybe, that the pinhead, if you want to restate what it is, what we're referring to, but the pinhead, I don't have it right on the top of my head what it is, but the pinhead conceptual continuity that he referred to is an anticipation of the digital environment we're in, where everybody is their own center.
Well, I mean, yeah, I have a block, I suppose. I don't know whether to go in with my big disagreements or whether my gloss that might be more friendly. I mean, I can start telling you about Frank Zappa's statements in the particular. It began as a fraudulent interview, which was part of a promotional device of Warner Records in 1971. It became part of the press release for 200 Motels, and it's an interview. And I could run off if you can. You've got a couple of minutes and find it and read it to you. Although when
no, let's not do that.
No, we won't do that. But the pinhead idea is about how what we're dealing with is cultural tokens. Each token has a meaning, and what you're doing when you're doing any cultural work is you're stacking up all these bits and pieces that aren't created by yourself. They're little words or ideas or stories that you've derived from elsewhere, and you stack them up in different ways, and we're all stacking up and shuffling these cards. It's like the cards that you're dealing when you're talking to people, and on each one of them, I think Zappa's trying to explain that they have a picture which is infinitely detailed. And so you can't reduce any of these cards and say, well, I know that card, because if you look into any of these pieces, you find that the whole of the world is concentrated in it. So we're continually dealing with these bright, shiny, extraordinary things called the bits and pieces we communicate with. And if you concentrate on one of them, and this is what all poets find, all scholars find, anybody who stops and looks finds, that all the bits we're dealing with are infinitely detailed, that you can find the whole history of mankind and the natural history of the world from studying one atom. And also this is stuff which physicists are telling us, that by looking closely at any particular thing, it seems to turn inside out. You start staring out at the wider universe. And I think that's what Zappa was getting at with the pinhead argument.
No, I agree, and I don't know if I brought this up in the previous hours, that in his mental mutants, what do they call them? United Mutations, his particular application to join a group he started. Rather
than the United Nations. I mean, United Mutations is like a reply to the United Nations saying this kind of internationalism is not quite enough. That just by taking the nation states of the world and joining them together, you actually produce something quite fraudulent and wrong. And that what we need is the United Mutations. And by turning nation into mutation, he implied that change and development are the central thing, not this controlling one area of the world and arming yourself to the teeth versus the other little areas, that maybe the nation-state way of organising the world is defunct and we should move on to some new level. I think that's contained in the term United Mutations.
Yes, and remember the quote we started off with in the first session from Zappa: "Can prolonged exposure to mixed media produce mutations?" Okay, well, I brought that up because
of the GTOs. I mean, I just support you by singing the GTOs. I'm a television baby.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a good album. Favorite musician he lists in his application to the United Mutations is, one of them is Buckminster Fuller. Okay. And I got a chance a couple of years later. When was that? 10 years later, I got a chance to ask him, why did he put in Buckminster Fuller? And I expected, some scholarly, just some more inventory of his understanding of Bucky Fuller. And he said, well, I was driving along the highway, I think in L.A., someplace, one day, and someone pointed out a Bucky Fuller architecture, and I'm assuming it was the geodesic dome. I'm not sure. But it seemed to be that, and it was just like when he looked at Joyce and said, this is good, this guy had it right. Anyways, he was driving along, someone pointed out the geodesic dome, he saw it, he said, that's cool, or that's interesting, or that's great, and then drove past. That's all he had to refer to, that someone pointed out, and he said, that's great. And then he found out, probably the guy said who he was, Buckminster Fuller, unless Frank already knew that. But he lists him as a major musical influence. Isn't that interesting? A passing item.
Yeah, but with Frank, when he's a very judgmental person. He always decides which side he's on. He's not bland. He doesn't say, "Oh well, I've understood it. I don't know yet what I think about it." His immediate response is to say, "Do I agree with it or disagree with it?" He looked at a few pages of Ulysses and decided that's real. I like Joyce. He didn't need to read lots of it. He just liked it. The same way looking at the geodesic dome and Buckminster Fuller, and that kind of commitment and decision to stand with or against what he responds to immediately, from the surface of it, is for me very critical of the usual sophisticated response, which is to say, I don't know where I stand on anything, but I know about everything. That it's an interruption to that, and it's very different and refreshing, and that's why I love Frank. I realised that I loved it from the very beginning. As soon as I heard it, I knew that stank in certain circles to be like that, to actually put your balls on the line in that expression. And he always did. Don't you think it's an example of that? Yep.
He didn't have time to, he wouldn't consider whether it was correct politically or whatever to say something. He just say it. Regardless of the consequences. That's what you like, right?
Well, I do, but there are numerous shock jocks of varying degrees of quality who think they're doing that, but don't come out with something like Frank Zappa. That Frank Zappa also, with this immediacy of expression and holding on to his immediate impression to things, also had a whole social attitude, a whole attitude towards people, and a sympathy with childhood, and a support for the delinquent, and holding on to early experience, even though he became very successful and like a top person towards the end of his life, a kind of sympathy with and a memory for his initial experience as being an Italian-American, kind of, not on the right end of things in his high school and everything. And I think he didn't forget that. He kept on to it. I don't know whether you're like that, Bob, but I find I'm very similar, that I hold on to how I was not popular at school at various times, and I remember it, and he's like got solidarity with his earlier suffering self.
No, I'm like that. I'm talking to you. But the
one thing we should tell listeners: we're not allowed to find out about Bob. He's a mysterious entity called Bob Purple.
No, I tell everybody what I am, but just nobody believes it. And
all right.
I'm not spending my life proving who I am. I know who I am, and time will show that everything I say is accurate. But let me respond to this. What comes to mind to prove your point of him remembering the underdogs, remember in one of the society pages, when the guy who did the vocals on Pat Robertson, that Eric guy, Eric? He read the letter, the manifesto.
He's the guy who got into trouble with the audience because he kind of voiced he went and did a parody of a preacher kind of dissing Zappa, and his story was that members of the audience thought he was real and wanted to beat him up after the show.
I don't know if that's it. I'm talking about when Eric, whatever his last name is, he reads the biography of Pat Robertson.
Yeah.
Criminal this, went to school, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, Eric, he was on the 88 tour, and he was on Broadway, The Hardware. I think that's the... But anyways, he and a bunch of other guys like Den, the guy who was the, fanatic, obsessive analyzer of Zappa's musical notation. Den, remember? Den and Eric and another guys, to me, street guys, they got into Frank's house, in 89, 90, and he spent like 5 hours with them. And the interview got published in Society pages. But the point is, I knew Eric, I met him and met these people. Like, here's Frank hanging out, quote, with these people just before he's going to go to Frankfurt and do the thing with John Cage and all that. This, to me, shows that he kept in touch with whoever was interested and had the energy to show up at his house and entertain him or prompt him. That long interview?
Yeah, your voice is beginning to break up. I don't know if we got a technological problem, but for me this is a product of the whole freak aesthetic. The whole idea of being a freak is the idea of not respecting these particular levels we're meant to live on and responding immediately to whatever's around you, and that's the ideal. That's how we should all live. It's a very strong idea of how to behave and what to do.
Yes, and I'm looking at the bucket fuller idea, and then I'm going to say something in immediate response to what you just said. But before I do that, Don Thiel talked about the key idea of the artist-engineer in the radical modernist movement. All the famous great artists, they all thought that they were artist-engineers and were up on science in that. The thing is that Bucky Fuller fits into that world. And then you take a Frank quote summarizing the history of the mothers. He says, the mothers managed to perform in alien time signatures in bizarre harmonic climates with a subtle ease that led many to believe it was all happening in 4/4 with a teenage backbeat. Just him interacting with these people that you were just citing and I was citing are bizarre harmonic climates. So it applies to the architectural environments he was creating, and it also applies to who he interacted with and how he was open and remained consistent. That could be part of the conceptual continuity, that he knew he was staying who he was. Who, in fact, he was when he was young, and he stayed that way, but he added to it. But since it was all one album, all one time, then his life included what he was when he was a kid or a teenager, all the way through to the end. You get what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, I think I do. I mean, I'm thinking about people could be bizarre harmonic climates. Once you say a thing like that, you get to the idea that there is no huge chasm between reality and culture, or between art and society, that there is no that you could improvise on the material strewn at random on your desk, that you don't have to have a score to play, that there is no text that we're all trying to master and that we're repeating, that you can look at the sky and you can find that to be something which will make you sing, that these things go from one to the other. And it seems kind of obvious. I mean, all poets or musicians stare at the sky and play from it. But you get an attitude about culture which actually is the general attitude, which makes what we're saying revolutionary. So the general attitude is that there are just various areas of practice that you master, that you learn from, and you keep within those, and then you shine within those. And anybody outside it can't understand what you're doing. That culture they're competing identity cultures of different people doing different things, and it fits into the idea of society as a war of all these different people against each other. Whereas this idea that the street people might be a harmonic environment in which you could improvise opens up the idea that to be a real modern composer you need to learn to talk to people that maybe you haven't dared to talk to before. That to be a real composer means to be daring socially. It opens up a whole area which they don't teach you in music college, and is something that I always try and tell young musicians. Well, actually, to produce good music, you've got to dare to do things socially, which maybe this tight little education you've got doesn't allow you to do.
No, exactly. So, bugaboo of specialism, which McLuhan says comes in with the printing press, is what we're stuck with in this today as an afterimage in this encyclopedic information environment. Now, I want to ask you, did Marx say anything about specialism? Was he anti that tendency? Was it happening in his day?
Well, the whole of Capital is about how modern production is based upon the division of labour. And the division of labour, which is produced not because of people wanting to specialise in things, but because that's what produces a profit, as if you rationalise it. And I mean, he's writing before Henry Ford and Taylorization and these sort of processes, but he's predicting them, that to make maximum profits it's best to get certain people doing one thing and then they pass along the thing that they've made and so on. And the whole of his work is about trying to understand why this produces a monstrous system where nobody really understands everything, because everybody is being divided up to compete to produce the very best widget, and they end up not understanding what the widget's for. And this is actually our experience of most of us in this society in earning money. We absolutely know we must master this particular area of understanding how labels are read in the pharmaceutical trade, and then we get very brilliant at understanding the psychology of reception and these words and so on, and we can't stand back and look and say, well, why is everybody consuming these pharmaceuticals? What is going on? That everybody's so intent on their skill and having their career that they can't stand back and look at the whole thing. And for me, the whole of Marxism is about trying to understand and criticise what this situation is, in which people could say to you, yeah, I hate what's happening to the world as a whole, but I have to earn my money, I've got to go and do this. And this madness, this split, is absolutely, I think, what Marx was trying to address.
Yeah, excellent. Now, good answer. McLuhan thought the electric environment could lead to a non-specialist society. I would say that Karl Marx uses different terms, but in exactly the same way, he believes that the capitalist society could lead to a revolution and a rational way of seizing all the. I mean, people misunderstand. They think that Karl Marx is so anti-capitalist. He wants to go back to something before. Not at all. He praised capitalism in the sense that it produces all these energies and this division of labour and all these extraordinary things going on all over the world. His complaint is it hasn't gone far enough. It's always a progressive criticism of capitalism. So when I think you say electronic media from the McLuhanite vocabulary, often I'm saying capitalism from the Marxist vocabulary, but the position on it, which is that all these amazing things produced, which you conservatives just do not understand. You're sitting in your specialisms, you're just sitting there living in the past, but it doesn't mean I'm simply going hooray, hooray for today. You know, that there's something more to be done. Exactly. So McLuhan's genius was to point out to the literate culture that the very medium, the book that they, quote, worshipped, unquote, was the archetype of fragmentation and specialization. And he says, you're not looking at the new electronic society and media that counters the book. And I see a lot in your writing that you criticize the hoity-toity, snobbish book people, the print-oriented bastards, who maintain this snotty illusion of holding up some values and miss the action everywhere else in their ivory tower.
Well, I do, Bob, but at the same time, I feel quite double about it, because in some ways I really like the people who stick to the book and who take the book seriously and want to pick up books and look at them. And I feel that a lot of the people who think they're in charge of literary culture and resist the bad pop culture actually don't know what the book culture is anyway.
Exactly. McLuhan used to say that semi-literate people have no clue about the what he called figure ground effects of literacy, and he said a truly literate person is someone who's not identifying with the process of the book, but recognizes them and works with that, within it. Like Frank worked with sound. I mean, there's a guy who was detached about what he made as he made it. He could see through the effects of what he was making as he was doing, and he always was ironic about it. Like, I remember that song in Freak Out, he's criticizing society, and then he says, but after all, I'm just a musician. Maybe I'm just here to play. You remember that?
Yeah, where he says, maybe that's not for me to say. They only pay me here to play.
Yeah. And I want to cite the revolutionary part of what we're doing here. Zappa did include in his conceptual continuity running for president. And I talked to Cal Schenkel. I know that Frank talked about it in 1970 or so. They were joking about running Tom Wilson, I think. But Cal Schenkel told me, yes, Frank was secretly running for president starting in 1968. And so Frank wanted to be a great artist, engineer, and mold society, at least in a way. Remember he called it in the Frank Kosky interview back in 1967, the Jazz and Pop interview, he called, we'll call ourselves the Interested Party. Do you remember that? I
do, and his meeting Frank Kosky always struck me very powerfully, because Frank Kosky wrote the book Free Jazz and Black Nationalism and interviewed Archie Shepp, and it was from all that side of things. And many people try and make it a separation between free jazz and that politics and Frank Zappa, and they always point out, well, Frank Zappa said he didn't like jazz, and produce all these kind of nerdish, specialized divisions, when from Frank's point of view I could always see that he responded to the very best in jazz. He always refused the big old heritage lie, which all the jazz musicians, the real jazz musicians, hate anyway, and honed in on very specific people that could help him build what he wanted to do, which is just the attitude towards tradition that we should have. That tradition becomes a headache, tradition becomes an oppression. Oh yes, I've inherited the classical tradition, I've inherited the literary tradition. People who talk like that never know what they're talking about. But people said, well, I read this passage in Rabelais, which I thought was amazing, and I can do this with it. They're the real people. And Frank, for me, talked like that. He wasn't pompous about areas of culture. He just responded and used it. And his responses to Charlie Mingus and Eric Dolphy give me absolute no doubt he could respond to areas of jazz completely, but quite rightly he objected to this. You could explain it better than I could, Bob. This particular American idea of jazz, which kind of makes me sick to my stomach. Actually, you know, when the media deal with it and they go, "This is a jazz thing," and you get this sort of. I'm at a loss for words to express how different from the responding to the music I find that kind of commercial representation is.
We're still being considered. You're objecting to the categorical imperative or the specialist categorization the media do, but the what was I going to say? I think that Kofsky Zappa interview is really important. It was 2 parts, and David Wally either read that and then got in touch with Jazz and Pop, and Pauline, whatever her name was, she hired him, and he became a music critic for Jazz and Pop. And that Pauline went on to be Jim Morrison's mistress, and is portrayed in the Doors movie, Oliver Stone's Doors movie, as the kind of witch, the witch who initiates him or something. That was the editor, Pauline somebody, I think it was, a good friend of Dave Wally's. But I bring this up because that Kofsky-Zappa dialogue is really interesting, because you got a Marxist meeting a savvy media guy who comes out of advertising. So it's sort of like McLuhan and Marx.
It's sort of like a preview of our conversations now.
Exactly. It really, because I didn't follow all of Kofsky. He disappeared, but I think I got the feeling he got disappointed in Frank, because you can see him in the interview. He's willing to say, my God, we got this guy. He's got this power. In 1967, this could be the fulfillment of Marx's dream, to the degree that Kofsky was a Marxist, literally. But he's all excited, and then I think he's shocked that Zappa never heard of Bertolt Brecht, things like that, part of the Frankfurt School canon or something. But he was intrigued by Zappa, but I think he gets disappointed later. Does that sound familiar?
Very familiar. I mean, an awful lot of very worthy, educated Marxists love Frank Zappa up until Flo and Eddie. And it seems to me that that's just when your Freudian sensibilities should kick in, and if you haven't got them, then you just lose it. That you can't stand the way that somebody who used to seem very clearly to pursue a culture of social comment has somehow moved on to saying, well, we're cabaret, and it's funny, and we're vulgar, and we don't care, and all these things. But art should never care. You know, art that cares is always a lie, because art is about exuberance and about celebration. It has its own function. And for art to say it cares, always to me is like caring in the wrong place. That if you really care, you're not doing art. You know, you're really caring.
That's right. And so Zappa shows that he's not a specialist because he goes on, and while he's doing the flow and any stuff, he does get hurt, but very quickly he resurfaces with the Grand Wazoo and then the Petite Wazoo, which is the album of that. The Petite Wazoo, Imaginary Disease, is a great album. And,
yeah. Bob, we're half an hour in, and your voice is breaking up, and I'm thinking about the recording, so I'm thinking, should we just stop and realign ourselves?
Yes,
yeah.
I'm going to hang up you.
So we're halfway through now, and so this is part one of Bob Dobbs and Ben Watson talking about everything, but kind of based on Frank Zappa, and we're just going to cut it here and carry on for another half hour very soon.
Yeah, you're going to cut me off, then call me right back.
Okay.
Okay.
Ready?
Okay. The Kofsky, Kofsky gets disappointed. Did you have that on record? Him saying that in his reviews of later Zappa?
I don't. I'm kind of thinking about Henry Cow in Britain and Carl Dallas, who represented like some of the most interesting radical musicians and critics within the British scene, and their rejection of Zappa after Flo and Eddie. I'm thinking of that more than specifically Frank Kofsky.
Yeah, I just know that Frank Kofsky is never seen again in association with Zappa. He just disappears. But the interesting thing, you talk about Zappa moving into the Freudian zone, it was in the early 70s, according to a book called The French Joyce by, I think, Gert Lernoux. He documents how after 68, Derrida and the Joyceans start retrieving Freud. And it's actually, this is the interesting thing about Zappa. He was so tuned in, and Gail has commented on this, that even though he's doing his own work and moving on, he is registering, and you can find other areas of culture that are moving in the same direction. So his move into Freud, or echoes of that, the Freudian unconscious, was being done by other people that were very involved in the radical mood of the 68 period. So just an interesting parallel I've thought about, and it's the first time I've had a chance to say it.
I'd have my objections to that, Bob. I got a lot of objections to that, Bob, because, I mean, when you think about surrealism, which kind of undergirds a lot of what, well, Zappa and Derrida and all those people are doing, they were part of Freud being first translated into French, I mean, coming out of German into French. So the idea of going, I mean, we can have an idea of some sort of pendulum that swings between Marx and Freud, and you could say, well, that's like swinging between self and society. Freud deals with the self, Marx deals with society, so people go from one to the other. But I think if you examine either of them, you'll find that they're trying to talk about the other thing through. Freud talks about the psyche and the self, and is always trying to talk about society, and Marx actually is all about alienation and the experience of the self within society. So dividing it like that always seems to me a partial understanding, and the pendulum swinging between partial understandings. It seems to me these are the times of fashion, moving from one thing to another. And I think, Bob, you and me should be beyond this. We are not interested in Derrida's star rising and falling and so on. I mean, we can explain it, you know, that after the disappointments of 1968 and the fact that this fantastic world revolution didn't seem to win, a lot of people said, let's bin Marx, let's bin Freud. I mean, they wanted to get away from all thinking. We invented postmodernism. But I think true thinking should stand back a bit, and with a certain kind of aristocratic disdain from this fashionable pendulum swinging.
Oh,
yeah?
No,
do you see what I mean?
I understand that. No, I sort of agree with Jane. I didn't mean that. I'm just saying that Garrett Lewin noted that in their early 70s, Telos magazine, I think it was Telos, T-E-L-O-S, that Derrida and his other people sort of dropped their Maoism and went into Freud.
But that's like dropping the worst kind of Marxism you could ever adopt. I mean, you know,
No, I agree. I'm not talking about the quality. I'm just saying that here's Zappa.
Yeah.
It's a whole other area moving in that direction. But the postmodernists end up writing histories and saying, well, the great Derrida went into Zappa.
Yeah. Well, I'm worrying now that you're putting Zappa in the same breath. That Zappa is not critical, but in the flow, and then we can follow it actually probably better with the Beatles, and we say, well, 1968 is the summer of love, and then 1969 we get into violence in the streets, and then we can track it all with Beatles. We don't even need Zappa anymore because we can track it with the Beatles.
No, but wait a minute. Zappa is nothing but in his albums, not in his concerts, but in his albums, commenting on the trends and fads.
Absolutely, yeah. I
mean, I'm not saying that Zappa went into the Freud at the same time because of Derrida or anything else, though we could look at McLuhan, who might be able to explain why that became a figure for a few years in the early 70s for intellectual concern among people who were radicalized. I'm just saying that I'm trying to show that Zappa was tuned in, and to be a figure, to be someone who's commenting, you have to be sensitive to what's happening. And today, or back in the 70s and 80s, everybody was sensitive. More people were being addicted or worried what was happening on the media, and they spent a lot of time watching the media. That is a problem for the revolution here. But Zappa was very good. I've heard people by the late 90s said, gee, I wish Frank was around to comment on the .com web world. You know what I mean? They miss his critique of the of the 90s.
And the beauty of it is that I think it's immediately apparent. I mean, somebody once said to me, among a group of friends, there's always one of them that likes Zappa. You know, there's a group of friends, and some of them into Van Morrison, and some of them listen to Bono, and there's always one who likes Frank Zappa. But I always think that one is the most critical and thoughtful person of the bunch. And it's this ability to always produce the objections, to not go along with fashion, to criticize fashion, which means that, for me, Frank Zappa is in the media world a prosthesis of a coherent revolutionary attitude, that they should be connected. Unfortunately, a lot of the people who are into revolution specialize in that and just can't see that it matters to have some record that people play at parties which kind of objects to a lot of things and gives a chance for the 1/20th person who objects to assert what they think. But I think it's crucial.
Yes, now, in your...
Tell me, I spoke quite a long time then. Is my voice cracking up at your end? Because your voice is getting very bad.
Oh, no, you're clear.
Okay. Well, that's all right. I'll just talk more for this half.
Yeah, you can, and see what I can get in. I wanted to say that it seems in the Marx world that you're in, or the Socialist Workers' Party world, or whatever it is over there, that you're always bugging these people, say, hey, don't specialize. I've had the same effect in the McLuhan world, in that people think they don't see where Zappa or all these other things I bring up, Lyndon LaRouche or something, has to do with the McLuhan world. So we're both non-specialists, and I'm saying in a totally... Okay, today, what is a revolutionary attitude, other than we're celebrating things that people don't normally celebrate, and we get on the air and bug people because we do that? That's not a revolution unless it's... Are you just worried about an attitude, having a revolutionary attitude? I know you want to get rid of capitalism, but how do we juggle that? Or are you having a good time while you're on a serious agenda to overthrow capitalism?
Well, I didn't quite get everything you're saying there. I mean, I think that a certain kind of depressive, profound left-wing pessimism about the world is a completely reactionary point of view. The point of view that says, well, you and me, we agree about our values, but there's this bad world out there, isn't it awful? That, in fact, that particular point of view always destroys any kind of life and proper revolutionary spirit, and that the duty of a revolutionary is to take absolute joy in the fact that the whole thing is disintegrating.
Okay, just so if we broadcast this, and I don't even know if I'm coming through clearly, if we broadcast this, the fact that I'm breaking up is part of our jamming, because I'll get to say what I'm saying now later when it's a better connection. And the reason the connection is good today is that we're using my computer rather than Carolyn's. Carolyn's has a stronger Skype for some reason. But she's gone to the airport.
It's a question I'd like to ask you, because I'm using Esther's computer, my partner's computer. Why is it that women today have the better computers than the blokes?
Because they know what they're doing. We're just old POBs trying to keep up.
Right, okay. So this is Amateur Hour. We're the clowns. We're following on the big procession. Did you know that in ancient Rome, when a successful Caesar had come back from conquering some outlying parts so they could take the captured men in the that they defeated and send them to the other side of the empire to do work and was slaves and so on, and they'd come back and they'd do a big procession through Rome and everyone would shower him with petals. Always right at the end of the procession there was a donkey pulling some foul-smelling cart with a guy standing up just making fun of everybody. And I think that's who we are.
Yes, yeah. You mean it was the Manipian?
Yeah.
Manipian.
Yes, Manipian.
Now, the thing is, we're not specialists, so we watch our partners become specialists and get addicted to the latest medium, and they become experts on it, which, if it's an archetype, women have the opportunity this century to do this, to get into technologies that they couldn't have 50, 100 years ago, right? So, but they are pushing us into computer dominance. Anybody who's using an expert at the computer world is inflicting it on us, and definitely not warning us of the side effects of what they're doing. And that's part of our revolution. You know, I'm on another show, and I broadcast every week. But today I announced that it's no longer an ongoing press conference. I announced that I was president of the United States. It's going to be a State of the Union address. It's going to go on indefinitely. And that is a practical response to this media swill that's going on all over the place.
Well, I walked into my house, my flat today, and for some reason the TV was on, and it was Gordon Brown, our Prime Minister, doing a speech at your Congress. He's been over there in the States. I mean, I know you're in Maui, but you're really part of America. And I felt before I walked into the room, there's some acting going on. There's some acting. And I hate actors. I hate that. I like rock and roll. I like people who get up on stage and provoke an audience and are real. The idea of acting, I'm going to act Jim Morrison. I'm going to act someone else. So why not be yourself? What's going on? And I just felt there's someone acting. Who is this great ham? And I went up and it's my Prime Minister. I mean, it's just... And... I mean, I think most people know that, I mean, most people hate politicians, don't they? But they don't know how to get rid of them.
That's the problem here. We're potential politicians, and yes, that's our issue.
Well, I think we're actual politicians on the level of Frank Zappa or George Clinton or the people I like, who I've found who have some sort of influence on this electronic world that we're dealing in. And they're people who didn't stand on their dignity and they had nothing to fear from people revealing anything, because they're not standing on some moral card which doesn't admit all the truths which Freud found out about everybody, that we're not standing on any plinth of lies, of a pretense about what we are. And this may make us silly or disgusting or what have you, but we think most people are pretty silly and disgusting, but also brilliant, and we should work from there, and this level of excellence where, I mean, so much politics is about being able to undermine somebody for something which, when you think about it, is not really a bad thing anyway. I don't really understand it. I mean, I find it hard to comprehend. I mean, do you comprehend it, the kind of... ways in which big figures are brought down?
Yes, I comprehend it. I mean, McLuhan explained that in his book From Clay to Archetype. But, since... Am I breaking up?
Yeah, you are. How do you know you are?
No, I don't know. I had to ask you.
You can hear it in my responses to you.
No, you're clear.
All right, well, if we keep going for another 15 minutes, we've still made a show, so maybe we should soldier on under these difficult circumstances.
Yeah, like I'm Cecil Taylor, I'm Wildman Fisher.
Yeah, well, Cecil Taylor insists on the very best piano, and he makes you wait, in queues, while the piano's changed, because it's got to be one with, 2 extra notes on it.
Yes, have you ever heard, years ago, in 1970, 6970, I thought I read that Zappa named Moon Unit after Cecil Taylor's album Unit Structures. Have you ever seen that? I've heard. I have read that as well. I can't find it anymore. I don't know where he said it.
We'll have to go and ask Gamma. He has one of the better archives.
Oh, okay. Because later it's Moon Unit. He has other. I think he has other reasons. Tweezel was named supposedly after Gale's toe, big toe.
Yeah.
It never came up again. He said it once and he never reiterated. He should have been saying it when he was on Johnny Carson, because everybody always asked him about the names.
Well, in naming children, parents enter into the level of poetry, because in naming children, you become aware of all the repercussions of a word. And every parent becomes a poet insofar as they name their children, and they become aware that they can't quite control all of the possible meanings of the names that they give their children. And as their children grow up, other things are discovered about the name and about associations to do with the name, and the person develops, and the whole thing has a life of its own. Now, this is something poets know exists in every word, but I think all parents are poets when it comes to the names of their children, don't you think?
Yes, it makes you self-conscious about the medium, and they study the effects only because they personally are going to be identified with it. We're going to be judged by it.
It's all true. But this is also why Finnegan's Wake is so nominalistic. Finnegan's Wake, if you look at it, it sometimes just feels like a list of names. Everything is a name. I mean, I think Joyce does this because in making up a name, you can say anything you like, any sound you like, because when you introduce to somebody and they have a name, you can't say, well, your name is not this, is not that. You have to put up with their name, particularly in an international context. I mean, living in London, you're continually hit with the most extraordinary syllables and sequences of words in people's names. And I think Finnegan's Wake was predicting this kind of internationalization. But I think there's also a thing in Finnegan's Wake, and it relates to poetry and Zappa, and I hope you will help explain this back to me, which is why the listing of names is so important in Finnegan's Wake. There's a reason why Joyce felt that he had to keep creating ridiculous names. I mean, it's just all over it. It's just like what the book consists of in many ways.
Yeah, a key line in Finnegan's Wake is, who gave you that name? But it's spelled N-U-M-B. Who gave you that num? Who gave you that name? That's a key line that McLuhan used to point out, because any technologies, and speech and naming is technology, it numbs you. It changes your sensory ratios. Now, I was going to say, just a step back a bit. When I read the Art, Class, and Cleavage, you talk about the nominalist tradition. And you kind of describe it, and I need to have you say your definition in a minute. You describe it in terms that McLuhan says are the non-nominalist tradition.
Well, that's
the
good.
rhetorical grammarian tradition.
Well,
and it's interesting. So what is nominalism aware of the categories, effects of names, in your understanding of nominalism?
Well, it would do, because the way I understand nominalism, and I thought I would agree with McLuhan, because he's quite a medievalist. I mean, he understands the Middle Ages, and probably that's why he became, you have to correct me, became or remained a Roman Catholic.
No, yes, okay, partly true.
And in terms of medieval philosophy, there was a long-term dispute within medieval philosophy between realism and nominalism. And in nominalism, people felt that reality was the specific things that are. And in realism, they were Platonists. They believed that the real things are the abstract forms which persist through time. And so a nominalist would say, I only believe in real circles which are drawn here, there, and everywhere, whereas the realist would say, no, the real circle is something abstract which is ineffable, that you can never get your hands on, but is the idea of the circle, and that's more real than any particular circle that might be written. So the nominalists were always on the side of the particular, and didn't agree with generalizations or abstractions. So in that way, a nominalist is kind of close to a materialist.
Right. But isn't one of the definitions of nominalism is that they regard naming as arbitrary, and you could name anything, any name you want, whereas the grammarian says, no, the object evokes the qualities of the kind of name you need.
Well, when we get into linguistics and naming, then I'm prepared to... I mean, these big generalizations about disputes and philosophy in the Middle Ages kind of break down, and I would not like to... I feel suddenly disqualified to assert about that.
Okay, now well, all through your books, you point out that the thing described is not the thing. How do you say it? The conception of the thing is not. It does not include all that the object is.
The quote from Adorno that I use a lot is, "The concept does not exhaust the thing conceived."
Yeah. Okay. That, in a way, if nominalism doesn't put too much value on the name and says you can name anything, it's the object or the reality yourself that you're naming is more important. Is that included in that definition you just gave?
Well, it always depends upon which levels people point to, doesn't it? Because you can be a materialist of the kind that says, well, the concepts that you have and the words that you have doesn't exhaust real life. Real life outflanks you. And I kind of would like to be that kind of materialist. But then you can also have a materialist who says, well, the real thing is the words people say and their actions and the ways in which we communicate. This level you're talking about drops away. I don't understand it because it doesn't matter. I'm a real materialist because I'm talking about what people really say. And so it's almost like you can point to different levels and assert a materialism at different levels. So it does very much depend upon the particular context in which somebody is trying to be very material.
Okay. Well, I'll leave that lying. And
I suppose for me, the sublime argument, or the argument I love, is the one that tries to keep all the levels in the brain and to make you aware of all the levels, so that the kind of chauvinism of a particular level and playing one off against another reduces, because you are imagining all the different levels that you can, and so that you understand that we're on, a ball of magma that was thrown into space from the sun, and all these physical things, and you understand it all the way up through society to the very high level of us talking to each other, and that none of these are specified as not interacting with each other, but there are differences between them, and that you try and understand them all in their interconnectedness, so that the whole thing is combined yet uneven.
Yeah, and so I immediately think of the trivium. McLuhan said if he had a day in modern education, he would have the kids learn the rhetorical tradition, the grammarian tradition, and the dialectical, plus the quadrivium, which is music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy.
Well, these are classical divisions, aren't they?
Yes, and so he believed that you use all the modalities. So,
but I think they need to interpenetrate. That I would be quite suspicious of someone teaching Latin that wasn't aware of the Earth's crust and earthquakes and Vesuvius and how the divisions in the Earth's crust and volcanoes affected the Romans. I mean, that all these things interact, and you can't really, by looking at any particular thing in proper detail and proper alignment of where it is, it does unfold to be everything. and that anybody who really concentrates on whatever their subject is, it all turns inside out, and they find they have to know about everything else. That no subjects are ends in themselves, that they become little keyholes through which you suddenly see everything.
Right, you're quoting McLuhan again. That's exactly his approach. And Marx felt that too?
Well, I'd be hard put to it to find a quote where Marx says exactly that. I feel that Marxism is the carrying into secular society, into a Darwinian rational secular society, hermetic ideas of the one and the importance of understanding the one, of understanding the totality, and that he maintained that in looking at economic issues which divide society from each other. So Marx always had an idea of, it's okay to teach this about how to compete with another firm, but what if all the firms compete? Can't you try and imagine the whole society? So by maintaining this idea of totality, which comes from dialectics and from hermetic traditions, within a non-religious age, it seems to me he's providing the key argument to criticize the disastrous outcome of rationalities pursuing each other in ways that aren't trying to imagine the whole, or the whole thing.
Yes, and that's what Finnegan's Wake tries to do. So Joyce and Finnegan's Wake includes the Marxist mandate, as you just defined it. But the thing about the lists of names, and we must be coming near the end, right?
We are, yeah.
We got about a minute. I just want to say the list of names.
No, we have another 5 minutes or so.
Oh, okay. He's listing...
Oh, no, we're 55 minuters, aren't we? We've only got another minute. You're right. Sorry.
Yeah. The listing of names is one aspect that the eye is molded by in the book, but at the same time, every page is condensed like little holograms, which is like Zappa's pinheads, all crammed into one sentence, one page. He's showing more than modality on the book page. But the listing is maybe the normal human mind, but then all these other effects are coming in from media or something, from relations of capitalism, that are causing an implosion. So definitely listing must be done all the way through the book, but the canceling of listening is also always maintained throughout the whole book of Finnegan's Wake.
And the end result can only be understood sonically or musically?
Perhaps.
For another show.
Let's go on to just do that next session if we remember.
Absolutely. Let's talk again, Bob, and this is the end of this one. Cheers.
Thank you, Ben.